This is Greg Pasternak from Riverside Life. This morning, it's a new morning, and we are still on the South Fork Eel River in its catchment in this region or subregion on the north coast of California. And we're visiting one of our high-resolution survey sites that's very representative of one of the classes. And so we have, I also just want to say we're near the town of Leggett, and the bridge for Highway 1 is right behind me. So we're on the South Fork Eel itself. This site is very representative of a confined, if you look around, we're in a confined canyon here. So confined, gravel-cobble, riffle-pool. If you look back there, you can see cobbles that are on the bed. There's a gravel cobble bar on the opposite bank with a lot of riparian vegetation because there hasn't been any high floods in a while to remove that. And you look down in the distance, we're transitioning from where we are in like a riffle right here into a pool in the distance, and then far beyond where you can see, there's another riffle and then another pool. So this is a pretty classic site. The other aspect of this class is it's the high width to depth ratio, which means it's a relatively wide channel, and we're especially at the bankfull level, let's see, this hand, right? Somewhere up here, the bankfull dimensions, and I'm gonna switch sides for a minute just so you can see that this is the near bank, which has bedrock outcrops as well as a lot of cobble on it. But in any case, so confined, gravel cobble, riffle pool with a high width to depth ratio. The reason why that high width to depth ratio is important is because when something is very wide, then it's very hard to get a lot of width variability, especially in a confined canyon. So this has a remarkably low width variability at bankfull stage, because the bankfull stage is hitting up against the canyon walls. And that's another reason why it's very important with this classification to be mindful of confined, partially confined, or unconfined. If you're in an unconfined setting, you could have a high width to depth ratio, and then there's plenty of room to have a lot of width undulation. But with the channel taking up the full valley floor, there just isn't a lot of space for width undulation. On the other hand, there is plenty of space for bed undulation, so there's a reasonable bed undulation taking place down through the reach downstream from here. So the confinement is not an impediment to bed undulation, but it's a big impediment to width undulation. So if you have a moderately high catchment area contributing a lot of water and filling a canyon floor, that is going to really control a lot of the dynamics of what's happening, and then that in turn is going to affect the habitats that are present. So it's just another reason to emphasize why confinement is a top level thing to be mindful of and to account for when you're evaluating a river. Also, just want to mention that for the statewide classification, which has fewer classes than each regional diversity, but this counts as a gravel cobble riffle pool, the same, but it's not there isn't like a specialized high width to depth ratio situation in that system. And then also, even though the metric here is for confined, it fell into the partially confined class. So all the other attributes are actually quite similar to what you find in partially confined rivers around a whole state for over 1,100 sites that were visited around the state. But but it is actually confined. So once again, the regional classifications are always going to be more precise and are recommended if you needed to use a classification for some management purpose. But from a broader context, the important point is that everything agrees that it's a gravel cobble riffle pool, and then confined. That's just one last point. When we think about entrenchment, in a confined setting like this, I've certainly visited sites that are both confined and entrenched. That's not the case here because we're confined by the bedrock. And so with the bedrock, you can have entrenchment within bedrock, but that is definitely not something that we see at this site. Okay, so thanks for visiting the South Fork Eel.